This $34 rear derailleur is pretty amazing and in some ways can outperform way more expensive rear derailleurs. So I know if you're a bikey person, the word Acera doesn't really fill you with excitement the same way that Ultegra or Durace does. The Acera 3020 rear derailleur is a 7 to 8 speed rear derailleur, which got an interesting quiet upgrade within the last year or so. It has an updated large cog in the back capacity of 40 teeth and a chain wrap capacity of 45 teeth, which is just huge. And this is a derailleur that can be run with multiple chain rings, so you can use it with a 2x or a 3x. Typically these days we see high capacity rear derailleurs, but they're only optimized for 1x, so you can't use it in a multi-chain ring situation. Let's compare that to a more expensive and more modern rear derailleur. This is the GRX. I believe this is the 810. It's their 11 speed. That's designed to take 2x. Its official capacity in terms of large sprockets in the back is only 34, and its chain wrap is 40. So compare that again with the 40, 45 of the Acera. Lots of people have used this derailleur with success, running a 4630 in the front and 11 to 40 in the rear. Most notably, you can do this without any cable hanger extender thing, which just adds complexity and a breaking point to the system. However, depending on where and when you buy this rear derailleur, it can be anywhere from $111 to $120. Compare that with this lowly Acera rear derailleur, which has more capacity and can be had for only $34. I think that's a pretty good deal. Enough talking. I'm going to show you guys how it works in a wide range double situation, and then we'll talk pros and cons. Okay, let me explain what's going on here. We've got the Acera rear derailleur, which is nominally 7 to 8 speed, but I'm using it on a 10 speed cassette, which happens to be 11 to 42, and this is an 11 speed chain. These are 9 speed rings in a 40-24 combination. This is probably my best, like if you're gonna go bike packing, touring, carry heavy stuff, ultimate wide range double setup. And the reason why this works is because, of course, I'm using a friction shifter. So I'll show you guys how it shifts. Okay, so this is 11 to 40, our highest gear, what you would see on many gravel bikes today. This is 11 to 38. Again, super easy to shift into lower gears. And this is 40-42. Already we are below 1-to-1 gear ratio. Many road-oriented gravel bikes kind of stop here in terms of low gears, but because we're in the cave of bad ideas, there's more. So I can drop this down, and now we've got 24-42, which is like a bananas low gear, perfect for really steep climbs. Also, when you're carrying a load. With this combination, we get over 600% gear range. Compare that to something like a SRAM Eagle, where you only get around 520% gear range. This totally destroys Eagle in terms of range, and all that done with a very humble $34 rear derailleur. One reason I really like this setup is because the rings are very distinct. There's hardly any crossover. Again, 42 is big, 24 rear. And the way that you would ride this is that you would spend, I don't know, maybe 95% of your time in the big ring. So it's virtually a 1x at this point, right? I mean, we've got the range here of most modern road-oriented 1xs, but when things get steep, you of course got the bailout gear, and you can also fine-tune it. There are some combinations that are possible, but not ideal. So for example, 2411, as you can see, surprisingly takes up enough chain where it's not too floppy. I've been using the Acera rear derailleur for the last couple weeks, and I have to say I have been thoroughly impressed with what a $34 rear derailleur can do. I do sort of wish that Shimano would trickle this up to the GRX rear derailleurs, because it would be amazing. So what are the pros and cons? The first big pro is clearly the price. $34, objectively a lot less than $120, $130. And another big pro is spec-wise, in terms of stated specs. It can take a much larger rear sprocket, and it has a lot more chain wrap. And as you guys know, Shimano tends to be fairly conservative with their stated specs. So yes, you can stretch out the GRX just a bit more, but with the Acera, the stated specs are even higher, so that means you can get even crazier. Just go wild. So what are the downsides of the Acera? The first one, it's, it's an Acera. It's not very blingy. It doesn't quite have the fit and finish of the GRX rear derailleur, or, even Tiagra or 105. But I do have to tell you, when you're actually riding, you don't notice that stuff. It just shifts and it takes up the chain slack. Probably the most significant downside of the Acera is that it doesn't have a clutch. So clutch, if you don't know, is basically a really strong spring, and it helps with chain slap and keeps the chain on the chainring. And while it's nice to have, or important to have in some riding circumstances, don't let that be a deal breaker. I came in testing this Acera knowing that it didn't have a clutch, and I was fully expecting to be dropping my chain left and right and hearing all sorts of chain slap, all the terrible things that's supposed to happen to your bike when you don't have a clutch. And I have to say, none of that happened. Granted, I'm not taking it on super rocky mountain bike terrain, just our typical green trails and our gravel roads. And for the most part, I did not have a problem. I think you know who you are. If you need a clutch, then don't buy this rear derailleur. Click away from this video. You don't have to leave a comment. But I think if you ride mostly roads or even gravel roads and don't want to spend over $100 for a high capacity rear derailleur, and you're going to use friction, then the Acera 3020 is actually surprisingly good. Here's the thing, a lot of people talk about shift quality with bike components. And honestly, when you're talking about shift quality, what you're feeling is the shifter and not the rear derailleur. Ultimately, most rear derailleurs function the same and won't give you any different feedback. It's a shifter that does that. If you're running friction shifters, I think you get a more honest and direct experience of what the rear derailleur is actually doing. Otherwise, if you're running index, and what you're feeling is the shifter and not the rear derailleur. All that to say, I was expecting the Acera to feel leagues worse from the shifter perspective, from the friction shifter perspective. But honestly, once I started pedaling, it just didn't matter. Oh, another pro of this derailleur is that it uses the older 2-to-1 pull ratio. So if you have older friction shifters, then it should work no problem. As much as I want you to buy the Uno is not necessary with the Acera. The Uno is necessary, however, if you want to use a rear derailleur like GRX, because it uses the 1-to-1 cable pull as well as the stronger spring. It's good to have a longer lever to fight that. So there you go, a inexpensive bike component that in some ways is actually better than more expensive bike components. That hardly ever happens these days. If you like this focus on interesting parts and not just selling you the new, then consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon. It's what lets me do a little deeper dive on quirky things. And if that's too much commitment, then pick up some stickers or some stem caps from our merch store. And as always, keep the supple side down.